Today's episode of the Security Breakdown is brought to you by Skills for Security, the UK's leading provider of security training and qualifications. Whether you're looking to upskill your team or advance your own career, they've got you covered. Check them out at skillsforsecurity.com to take the next step in your security journey. Hello and welcome again to the Security Breakdown. I'm joined once again by Anastasia Pelser. This time we're not going to be talking so much about the explosion attacks that we heard about in the last podcast where Anastasia joined us. It's more about learning about what can we learn from an industry in a different country, what commonalities do we share, what kind of things are the same, what kind of things are different, and that's what we'll be talking about. So welcome back, Anastasia. How are you doing?
Hi, Matt. Well, thank you so much for having me again. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Thank you. So we'll get into it just now. We sent a senior engineer from here over to South Africa very recently. It was last week or the week before. And he was terrified. He was like, and he wouldn't leave his hotel. And I think part of that was down to us kind of, well, I wound him up a little bit and went, that's it. I hope you got your will in order if you go to South Africa. But I was only joking. But he took it seriously, so I need to learn from that. But yeah, there is a perception here that it is a vastly different place. And I've visited and yeah, there are problems, but there are problems everywhere. So is that what you think, Anastasia, before we sort of get into talking about it?
I think we do have issues. Obviously, I think it's the grass is never greener. I think you have your own different issues that if we had to experience it in our space, I don't think we would necessarily know how to handle it. We do have also, we are seen, especially within like the sub-Saharan Africa side of things, we as South Africa is the land of milk and honey. We obviously also attract a lot of neighboring visitors. So from like Botswana, from Namibia, from Lesotho itself, a lot of our bombers are actually foreign nationals. It's not necessarily our own people. They do mix. So you will have some of the people from our local communities that engage with, for example, Lesotho nationals. But a lot of people see us as a space where they can come for opportunities, especially like financial gain, etc. So I think we have different issues, and our landscape is so different because we don't have this extensive border control between our neighboring countries. I think that also plays into our vulnerability.
That's really interesting. So how is that reacted to locally by South African nationals? Does that create a lot of, I guess it creates a lot of political talk if it's perceived that a lot of the crime is imported?
Yeah, so a lot of our, you will get, for example, in the rural communities, we have a lot of xenophobic attacks. And people protesting because they feel, for example, that foreign nationals are given employment opportunities and our employment rate's already that high. And then especially once it gets out there that foreign nationals are involved in crime as well, that creates a lot of chaos within rural communities especially. And then you will see a lot of smaller groups within the rural community starting to form, and there's a lot of clashes between them. And I think that is why there's also this big perception about violence, is because there's a lot of internal attacks on foreign nationals between South Africans, and sometimes they mix, and it's actually, because we have this broad cultural diversity within South Africa, I think that brings a different dynamic to our space as well.
Yeah. And thinking from the UK's side of things, I suppose there is definitely some parallels there in how things are seen in the sort of crime landscape. You'll have probably heard, I guess, about the awful that happened in Southport, and then maybe saw what happened afterwards in terms of the reaction here. It was a lot of talk online about who the perpetrator was, because he was under 18. So the law in this country is that if they're under 18, the identities are not exposed. And that caused all kind of speculation, which resulted in, some pretty ugly scenes, I think is probably the easiest way to put it. So there's that sort of parallel there where, there's a perception that there's a particular group or individuals that are perpetrating the crimes. And then there's a backlash from various sectors of society. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
What would you think? I mean, we've kind of got into the main body of this now, and what would, from a South African's perspective, how is the UK viewed in terms of crime? You probably don't think about us too much, but if it was thought about, I'm just looking for differences between South Africa and the UK.
I think from a South African perspective, I think we don't see the UK as high risk when it comes to crime, especially violent crime. I think for you as well, once something does happen and it does reach social media, it is obviously then world knowledge, so everyone can see it. Within South Africa, our crime is a little bit more hidden, if I can say it like that. So you won't necessarily see a lot of, if we have an attack, like I said, we have 0.6 average incidents a day. So let's say that's one every second day. You don't see that reported in newspaper articles, or you will have a little bit of Twitter comments going about, oh, this place was bombed again, but that's just local community speaking and wondering what's happening.
Almost not newsworthy sort of thing.
Yeah, because it happens so often. And I think we have other bigger issues like gender-based violence is a big thing in South Africa, as well as, like I said, the xenophobic attacks. And so there's different things that pulls attention. So violent crime as a general, like I said, has been normalized for us to an extent.
Wow.
So it's not newsworthy anymore or headline worthy. And it often falls through the cracks, and I think that is why we don't see a decline, because people don't know, and then we aren't educating our communities or society at large at what's actually happening. So for us, we view you guys as not a high risk, because we see isolated events in newspaper articles, or if it does reach us, but I think our perspective, if we do have things, it's a constant thing. It's, again, we had this crime is on the rise again. Gauteng is still a high risk province. This is how we are perceived, I think, as a country. That's from my side.
Well, you mentioned gender-based attacks. Is that for people who are non-binary, gender fluid, that kind of thing? Are they being targeted? Is that what you mean by gender-based attacks?
No, not necessarily. We have attacks like that, or in that space as well, but more towards female, like abuse against female and children. We have a big movement. Yeah. I think, again, it speaks back to our landscape and the cultural differences, and our communities that aren't educated, and we don't have this big empowerment necessarily in our rural communities. So there's a lot of struggle between gender roles still.
Okay. So that is I suppose it gets talked about a lot here as well, and there is quite a movement, rightly so, to make people safer, particularly, females may feel threatened more than men. I can speak about this personally, because I remember talking to somebody and saying, "Oh, really? You felt threatened there? I didn't." And then I thought, "Of course I didn't. I'm 6'2" and 15 stone, and I'm talking to a 5-foot woman." So it's but that, as a man, you kind of don't think sometimes, which is kind of thought-provoking in itself. But just thinking more specifically about the UK and South Africa, because as you rightly say, the landscapes are different. You mentioned that certain types of attacks have almost become normalised, but are also on their way down, but they're not newsworthy anymore. And we'll have things that are going on here that are different to what's happening in South Africa. Do you think there are things that that can be learnt across nations from each other, and if so, how to capture that? What can be done?
I think from my perspective would be that as South Africa, we still have a lot of focus on, or we have a large dependency on private security and physical security. Again, speaking back to, we are a very reactive, or we have a very reactive approach to crime in general, whether that is in a retail space or then going into other crime types as well. We don't really go into new technologies or explore that to that depth. I think that we can. I think we are just trying to face what we are currently experiencing before we can get into that space. But I think that is something we can learn from you, because once we do get our physical and violent crime down, something else will pop up, and technology is growing and it's ever evolving. So cybercrime obviously we also have cybercrime attacks within South Africa. It's not, but it's not that broadly broadcasted and seen and impacted by the community like it is with our violent crimes, or for example gender-based violent incidents. We have a lot more of attention directed towards the violence aspect of it, and I think if we aren't gonna address things like cybercrime and how are we addressing cybersecurity or implementing that in our space, a couple of years from now we will be having the same conversation but just in the digital space of things. So I think that's something we can learn and take from you guys, because you are a little bit more advanced and you might be already playing in that space, and that's something I think we still have a lot to learn from.
Yeah, I remember the first time I visited South Africa and being really struck by, I'd gone for a coffee somewhere, and within the like retail park that I was in where the coffee shop was, there were 4 different armed response units from different companies had arrived for their coffee break, I'm guessing. But just seeing 4 different privately owned armed response units was something that would be kind of alien to us here, because nobody is allowed to carry weapons apart from the police, which I guess from a South African perspective is like, what? Even the cash and transit guards don't carry weapons, you know, and frequently neither do the police. They have a stick. That's what they've got. So yeah, I guess that's quite a key difference. So we know about the armed response units that exist. We just talked about that. What about surveillance in South Africa? How effective do you think it is? That's something that here in the UK, we've got cameras coming out of our ears. There are cameras everywhere. There was a statistic, like, I read it like 20 odd years ago, that on average in the UK, you are photographed 300 times per day. That was 20 years ago. So there's cameras everywhere. We absolutely love them. We're crazy for them. I don't know why. I don't know what it is about us. What's it like in South Africa around that?
Slightly different. Obviously at our retail sites, and a little bit more in we have a lot of rural communities, and I think that is where the issue comes in. So not only is technology, so within Gauteng, that's one story. We are densely populated. We have a lot of things within the province that works in our favor. So yes, in Gauteng we have a lot of cameras, we have technology deployed, but it's easy to get transport from one province to another. Like geographical borders is not a thing for us as well. So if you go into our more rural communities like Mpumalanga or Limpopo, where it is not that city-like, so you have your smaller towns, technology and the infrastructure to support technology and, for example, surveillance is not there. Oftentimes don't have power or electricity, or a lot of power outages, where we can support it in Gauteng, but those rural communities or more farm towns don't have the infrastructure to support it. So although we are trying to roll that out and implement new technology and surveillance, because it does help us, it's also a cost thing. So for us, if it's in a more rural area, you will have very low quality technology implemented then.
Well, I think you've hit on something that's keenly interesting, certainly to me. You mentioned about the power outages, and I think that's something that's not really well understood here, that in South Africa, there's large portions of the day in various parts where the power just gets turned off. Load shedding is called. And I was like, yeah, mentally, before I visited South Africa, I was like, how bad can it really be? And then I visited, and it's like, oh my God, it's all the time. It's like, it happens quite a lot. And it was things that I didn't think of, like the traffic lights stopped working. And in the UK, if that happened, it would be carnage. No one would know what to do if the traffic lights stop working. How can we queue properly without the traffic lights? That's like our favourite thing to do. But speaking seriously, I saw the kind of impact that can have, because I remember driving past like a car. It was like a big yard, huge, full of cars, all with the same kind of damage. And the same kind of damage was the front corner had been caved in, because obviously they'd been at like a junction, something had gone wrong, and they'd hit another car on the front corner, and that's when my eyes were opened. So my question really is around how does that impact security technology? Because you must have to think about things differently to what we would do here, because if the power's going all the time, what happens with batteries? How often do batteries have to be changed? Or how do you keep your security systems up and mobile, because you still have to do it? So yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I think that is also one of the challenges we do face, is the fact that we often do have load shedding, and if not load shedding, our power stations also need updates and obviously regular maintenance. And if that does not happen, we have outages because of some or other failure at the station. And that influences a lot of things. And I think from a rural community as well, because the sites don't generate such big revenue streams, speaking from a petroleum perspective now, you will see those retailers not investing in things like inverters or a generator to then counter whatever is going on with, let's say, load shedding. So you will have that site vulnerable because lights aren't working. It will have minimal things that are working just so that they can still operate, so that they can service the client. But security then comes kind of at the back of their priority list for that period of time, because everything does have a cost implication to it. In more civilized parts of us, so in Gauteng, where it's a little bit more busy and we have the infrastructure to support it, that's a different story. They have inverters in place or generators that kick in, so that can then support the technology. So if you have off-site monitoring, that can still continue as normal. But a lot of considerations have to be taken to say, yes, we can have off-site monitoring, but we need this and this and this in place to support it should X, Y, and Z happen. So, I think it's not just the easy solution.
No, but that was the other thing that struck me, was the circumstance drives innovation as well, because you have to think differently. And it was telling, actually. I was talking to a battery distributor here in the United Kingdom, and a lot of the batteries they buy are from South Africa, because there's a thriving battery industry in South Africa. So it's like given birth to like a load of manufacture there. So it's really kind of interesting. And I think one of the things that's on my mind, thinking about the future of our business, of our industry here in the UK, is it's been proven to us really forcibly recently that energy supply is not a guarantee. It's, energy supply can be insecure, it can be attacked, it can be targeted. So it's incumbent on people thinking about security technology to produce and to sell, to think about what might happen in the future. And I think there's a lot to learn from South Africa, in as much as that's a scenario you've been dealing with now for several years, like 10, 15 years, is it? How long has it been going on for? Quite a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah.
It forms part of our day-to-day lives. I don't think, like now, we don't have load shedding as much anymore. I think there's a lot of maintenance that's being done, so we are lucky in that regard. But then other things also come into play, like water restrictions and things like that. So there's always something or else that you have to counter, and it does influence, I think, crime overall because it creates vulnerabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think I was talking to an alarm panel manufacturer that is the panels are sold heavily in South Africa through distribution, and they were like, "Why are they breaking our batteries so often? What's going on?" And it just hadn't thought about the impacts of load shedding and what stress it would put on their systems, and they would have to develop things differently to support that market. So that's what they ended up doing. So kind of interesting. It's more around that kind of the geopolitical environment and how that impacts how you have to think about security, however you about protective systems, how you have to think about technology and how it's got to operate, being specific to the environment. So is it possible, do you think, to, with that kind of thinking in mind, look into the future and almost predict or foresee new trends or new areas of risk? Because I guess if we could do that, that would be quite a good thing to be able to do.
Yeah, I think as you implement solutions, I think new problems will always arise. But organized crime remains organized crime. I think they will just alter their MO, their focus, their target. I don't think that will ever change. They will adapt. I think that is something that's also that I've noted in the past couple of years is how quickly organized criminals can adapt to whatever is placed in security measure to deter something, how they study the behavior as well from our side. Just as we study theirs, they study ours, and they quickly respond to what we place into the environment to deter their entire organization. So I don't think, obviously cybercrime I think will bloom in South Africa. I think that is something that's still coming for us, and we will see the impact a little bit later. But I think that again speaks back to how organized these criminals are, and I think unless you don't get that entire grouping or that entire syndicate, that will remain a thing. And I think it is like that for different, whether it is drug trafficking, human trafficking, violent crime, a lot of that is from an organized perspective. So unless you don't break those structures and systems down, I don't think that basis of organized crime will ever change. So new trends within South Africa will only, for me, will go into cybercrime, but I think we will still have our organized groupings here in South Africa operating. Depending on just how they operate will obviously change.
Yeah. I guess just thinking forward a bit as well, I've always believed that the biggest opportunity for innovation within my world is around what you do, which is data. And I think that with a sufficiently scaled and well organized data set, I'd like to believe that would help point to future directions of travel. Is that a fair thing to think? Is that where it could go with what you do?
Definitely. So maybe speaking to, again, the organized, and maybe to give you a little bit background as to why I'm saying I think it will always be there, is to perpetrators, obviously, the cash is their main motive now, and we will implement things to say, okay, let's reduce cash on sites. So then you reduce your vulnerability. But with that then comes another vulnerability, because they know there's this perception about how violent they can be, the perpetrator groups can be. So then now they are exploiting that fear for your life and for security. So I think then things like extortion comes into play, and that I think will definitely grow in our space as well. So that's things you can pull from the data to see the shift in, for example, threats during the crime, to say, if you don't do this, then X, Y, and Z is the consequences of it. And I think that's where you are starting to pick up a little bit on extortion, and extortion to businesses. So whether that is from a construction or protection side of things, or extortion to the community as well, where certain organized groups will maybe, especially in your rural communities where they don't have sufficient supply of water, they will then basically manage the water and you have to pay for it. Like they will extort for essential services as well. So I think they definitely adapt to that, and that's what we are also seeing in our space.
Yeah, how interesting, being held to ransom for basic services. Wow. I want to think a little bit about the industry in South Africa, and what would you say it's screaming out for? What would be the next thing that, if you were a South African security industry professional, what would you be the most desperate to get your hands on and do or change? Does the question make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. Yeah. I think I do, like I said, I do sound like a broken record, but I think one of the biggest things is not to work in silos. I think crime, obviously or security within our space, within South Africa, is very competitive. We have a lot of big and small security companies. You have your community-based security companies that we have, like we call them like farm security, so that's more in your rural spaces, but so there's a lot of competition where that comes from, and that creates silos of information and efforts, and I don't think that is very effective within our space, because the same perpetrators that target, for example, the fuel industry also target the retail industry, also targets the banking industry, and if we keep it in different silos, we will never be able to then deter or either mitigate this risk we are all facing as a collective, that everybody problem you were talking about earlier. And I think so for me as a security, or what the security industry needs, is collaboration. I'm not saying just provide information to anyone and everyone that wants it, but to strategically think about how do we share information that is for the greater benefit of all and is not seen as a competition between, because at the end of the day, we are all fighting the same criminals. And I think that mindset is something that we have to start fostering within South Africa, instead of seeing security as a lucrative business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, rather than it just the industry just providing sticking plasters, it's looking for things that will genuinely try to solve problems. And I think there's nothing wrong with sounding like a broken record. I remember reading once that you'll know that you're starting to get somewhere when you're sick of saying the same thing, basically. But I think that's what it takes. You've just got to keep raising it and raising it and raising it. And I'm 100% on board with what you're saying, that, you know, in a silo, you can only solve limited amounts of problems. And I think you're quite right. Anyone engaged in criminal activity isn't just going to go, okay, I am a cash in transit criminal, and that's all I'm interested in, and I'm going to focus just on that. They are after cash, and wherever that may be. So, yeah, I think you're 100% correct there. I'd be really interested as well to hear from anyone that's listening in on the podcast what they think about the UK industry, how good we are at collaboration, or are we bad at it as well? Anyone from South Africa about the issues that Anastasia is exposing, but how also can industry, responding authorities, victims, how can we collaborate better and safely without trying to use the collaboration as just a commercial tool to actually make effective change. So if we could get people to give us views on that, I'd be really quite pleased. Well, yeah, interesting. Again, thinking about those differences, but also similarities in between the South African industry, the UK industry. Really interesting as well to hear that actually, for people like us, our thoughts start to align that the only ways to really tackle things are to do that in collaboration and look for genuine solutions, not just selling a product that can do a thing, but how can we work together? So thank you for that insight, Anastasia. Once again, it's been fascinating.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And then also, Matt, something I just wanted to mention is, speaking about collaboration within a country, so between our different retail or sectors within South Africa, I also think collaborations like this and speaking to and getting insights into how different countries and societies approach their problems, and solutions that you have in place, I think also plays a very big role. I remember speaking to you earlier in this year or last year when we were at the Retail Risk Conference, and just seeing what solutions you guys have in place there and trying to adapt it or maybe modify it in our space as well. I think that also that collaboration is also key to see how we can move forward.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I learned a lot from being in South Africa. And I think the UK generally can learn a lot from the space in South Africa and how we can adapt to an ever-changing world, essentially, because that's where the real learnings are, where there's different scenarios and different things. So once again, thank you very much and great to see you.